Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday night Torah class of Inspiration and Light. We always like to start off with giving because how we give, that's how God's going to give to us. So please give generously so God, Hashem, can give us generously. This week's class is dedicated in honor of two very holy souls and people, the Alter Rebbe, in honor of his passing on the 24th of Tevis. The Alter Rebbe was someone that brought in so much light and continues to bring in so much light into this world. He wrote the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch, and he is a great source of life for everyone. So I want to publicly thank him for all of his work that he brought into the world. He's also a soul, a new soul that came into the world as well. He wasn't recycled. It was a brand new soul, and he left us so much. I would also like to dedicate this class to Rebbetzin Chana, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's mom, on the 28th of Tevis, this coming Shabbat. So we're gonna, later on in the evening, we're gonna share a video and talk about her as well. This week's class is dedicated in honor of a shlucha who needs a complete refuah shalema from the Virgin Islands, Henya Rivkah Bas Bracha Devora Leah. May we hear revealed good news now. Also in honor of Razel Bas Hadas, my dear neighbor growing up, Razi Malamed. May we hear good news from her as well. We should see her so soon. I miss her. I miss her noise. I miss her amazingness. I also would like to dedicate the class to a sister shlucha and someone that participates in this class on the recordings. She's someone that needs a refuah shalema as well. She's not feeling well and she needs mercy from Hashem that she should be able to continue her shluchas. Many of her community members are on this class and we're gonna all say amen together. Devorah Leah Bas Yafa Liba, we love you. I feel so blessed to know you. I would also like to dedicate this class in honor of my dear grandmother who inspired me my entire life, Rivkah Dina Bas Yosef Yehuda. In the chat box, I put names for Tehillim and obviously, and of course, for all Klal Yisrael, for the entire world. We should all have healing and everyone should have all the things that we need in our life, love and light. Tonight's program is a really special program that we are doing in honor of Here Covering, because a couple of years back, just give me one moment, I'm just gonna mute you if you're not muted. A couple of months back, we had a miracle story shared of a woman who was miraculously saved from a huge fall in the Niagara Falls. And when she fell off, all she was thinking while she was falling, she thought it was her very end. She kept touching her head and she said, "Where's my wig? Where's my wig?" And we were also inspired, everyone that was on, put your thumbs up if you heard this class live, that we said that we're gonna do a class on hair covering. And we are gonna first start off with a story from Sarah Karmely. Sarah Karmely is someone that was guided by the Lubavitcher Rebbe on so many topics and things, and she was told to please speak. And she wrote a book on stories. This is one of the books that she wrote. I will send a link, Stories to Hear with Your Heart. I actually got it signed by her, which is awesome. And then another book, Words to Hear with Your Heart as well. This is a book on inspiration, shalom bayis, peace and harmony, and love her real life stories that she experienced. She's going to share with us an encounter with the Lubavitcher Rebbe on advice on what he told her about hair covering. So Sarah Karmely, thanks for being here tonight. If you could please unmute yourself.
I believe I'm on mute. I'm muted. Okay. Good evening, everybody. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Baruch Hashem, we're all in it together, bringing Mashiach. All our stories all put together. It's a joint effort, joint journey. I see my dear friend Sari, so she's part of my journey because her mother was and still is my Mora from Italy. I'm really a wandering Jew. I was born in India to Persian parents, grew up in London. I got married and moved to Italy, where I met Chabad, my teachers. And now I'm moving here. I moved here, and next up will be Yerushalayim with Mashiach all together. It was really quite a journey because I sound like a groupie, but when I met the Rebbe, my whole life changed, and I wanted to do everything the Rebbe told us to do. One of the things was what? Covering the head with a sheitel. And in the Persian community, the only people who used to cover their hair with a sheitel were women who had yenamacha, and or the hair would fall out because of the chemo. So they always associated wigs with that. So people would ask me, why do you want to cover your hair with a wig? You've got beautiful hair, why you want? But it was my passion that I felt that I really wanted to do what the Rebbe told me to do. So I told my husband I'd like to cover my hair with a wig. He said, no way, why do you have to be different? Everyone in the community doesn't cover their hair, especially with a wig. No. Well, it was very hard for me to walk around without hair covering. Kind of you felt like you're not dressed at all. It was very, very difficult. And I decided I'm going to tell the Rebbe, because he was wasn't my mashpia in every way. I would tell him things I could tell no one else. He never judged me. And I told the Rebbe, that's it. I have to cover my head with a wig, because the Rebbe said we have to do that. My husband doesn't want, but isn't it true that I have to do what I've got to do? I expected the Rebbe's going to say, yes, you go ahead and do it, because that's what you're supposed to do. And he answered me with a two-part answer. Number one, don't fight about religion with your husband, I was doing that. My husband would tell me, why are you doing these things? And I'd tell him, you don't love me. Why do we say that? We want him to say, yes, I do love you. Wrong. Because as soon as you say that, you're brainwashing your husband to think, well, she's telling me I don't love her. Maybe I don't. I've learned what to do, but that'll be at the end. So the Rebbe said, don't fight about religion. And afterwards, my children told me, Mom, it really turned to self-religion every time you fight about this. The second part, the Rebbe told me, get somebody else to be mashpia on your husband, meaning to influence him. It can't be you, you're not his Rebbe. But it was very, very hard for me to listen to the Rebbe, because, hello, I wanted to cover my hair with a wig. So what I did, I'm embarrassed to say, but I did it behind his back. I bought a wig that I kind of hid it in my daughter's closet under all the sweaters. And I would, when I would go out, I would pull it out, hiding place, put it in my sleeve or my bag. And when I would go out without my husband, I would just put it on, and it looked good. When I would come back, I would, of course, have to take it off, because he didn't want to see me with that. And I couldn't understand when women would say, it's so hard to cover your head. I was like jealous. Hello, you're so lucky you can do it. What's so hard about it? You're so lucky you can do it. Well, time went by, and again, it was very, very difficult. I'm just going to share what happened, what allowed my husband to allow me to wear the wig. My father, Zechronah, passed away, and by us, we take it very seriously. The Sephardi community is very, very big on kibbut av aim. My husband told me, okay, for 1 year, for your father's year, you're allowed, I'll plead, you can cover your hair, but only with a hat, not with a wig, please. We don't do that. So better than nothing. When I was with him, I'd put the hat on. When I wasn't with him, I'd put the wig on. Well, what happened? The year was coming to a close, and it was now or never. It was either coming out of the closet, so to speak, and putting my wig on in front of him, or going back to before, and I could not go back to before. So it was my dear daughter, my last daughter, was getting married, was getting engaged. And I had a letter from the Rebbe that I actually have on me. I could share it with anyone who wants it, its own handwriting, that the Rebbe told me very specifically, do not get divorced. You have to marry off your children from Beit Shalem, with peace and harmony, because you got married under the chuppah with the Sheva Brachas, and it's your duty, because everybody watches you, what you do. So no, don't get divorced. You see, it's going to be good after all your children are married off. That's what he told me. Well, my last child was getting engaged, and the engagement party was coming along, and I didn't know what to do. I bought a beautiful wig, and I wanted to wear it that night. And my daughter was begging me, Mom, don't do it. It's going to be a big fight. Daddy's going to be upset. Please, my night of my simcha, I don't want this. So I didn't know what to do. I was torn. I went to the ohel. By that time, it was already past Tammuz. The middle of the night, and Hashem should forgive me, I really screamed from the bottom of my heart to the Rebbe. I said, Rebbe, you told me that after my children are married, we're going to talk. Where are you? I want to cover my hair. You told me not to do it. And I listened to you, but now I can't take it anymore. I went home. Next morning, see my husband is pacing back and forth. And he turns on and he said, I expect you're going to wear a wig for Daniela's engagement. I said, yes. And that was it. Since then, I wear my wig. It's like a miracle. He allows, not he allows, he actually doesn't mind it. So what I'm trying to say, be proud that you can wear shaitel. All of you women, really, it's like a crown of glory for a woman. It hides the white hairs also. But the main reason, of course, obviously we wear it because the Rebbe told us to do it. It's not the same as a hat. It's not the same as a kerchief. Wearing a shaitel is really, I feel, when you put it on, you feel like a Jewish woman. You feel the dignity and the majesty of what a Jewish woman is all about. The crown of a Jewish woman is wearing the shaitel. So any lady who has difficulty wearing it, I'm not being preachy, I'm just saying, appreciate that the fact that you can, that you don't have anyone bothering you not to do it. And that's my 2 cents. I'm just going to go into I have another Zoom I have to go into right now, but thank you so much for
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing this beautiful encounter that you had with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. You were so lucky to be guided by him, and I felt like it was a really important story, especially because he guided you that you shouldn't put it on in the beginning because shalom bias comes first, and
absolutely,
and you listened and it worked. Religion is obviously very important, but what's more important is peace and harmony in the home.
Absolutely, that's what Larry kept telling me all the time. And what would your husband say? Shalom bias comes first.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your personal encounter, and we hope to have you back in the future.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
You too. Thanks.
I would like to introduce to you now our guest speaker of tonight, who is a dear friend and a real role model to so many. Someone that, in my humble opinion, is brilliant, and it's so incredible to see a woman who's so educated and so sophisticated and so smart and so wise, but also so down to earth and a friend. So I'd like to, without further ado, introduce to you our guest speaker, Rivkah Slonim, who is going to speak about the mitzvah of hair covering and hopefully inspire us all and tell us all why a Jewish woman wears a head covering. If anyone has questions, I'm just going to ask everyone to please wait till the very end to ask it. Thanks so much. If you could please unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I so enjoyed hearing your story. It's a great testament to the indefatigable organizer of this class, Chaya BENCHEMHOUN, and to the spirit of Jewish women that so many of you have gathered together to discuss this great mitzvah of hair covering for a married woman. Before we say another word, we should recognize the radical nature of our gathering around a mitzvah, a ritual commandment we might not find especially relatable or easy. And this program is not comedy or any other form of entertainment, just being very transparent here. And yet you seem to all be committed enough or curious enough to give it a fair hearing. So I'm bolstered by that. Thank you. And also, Chaya, thank you for that very kind but overstated introduction. And if you ever do that again, I won't be able to do anything with you again. All right. So primarily tonight, I want to talk about what we don't know, what we can never know. It has been said that there are 3 categories of knowledge. What we know, which is no matter who we are, always going to be limited. It's always the smallest of the 3 categories. Then there's what we know we don't know. Like, for instance, I was aware that I knew virtually nil about marine biology until a few years ago. But here are some facts that I had no idea, did not know before this trip that I picked up on this trip. For instance, the male seahorse gets the egg from the female and carries them around for 45 days. Gestation happens in the male. Do you know how many times I've tried to get my husband pregnant with no success? Seahorses have a head like a horse, a tail like a monkey, and swim in vertical position. One of the best pieces of information I picked up, or the most interesting, was that there are fish that actually turn blue when they're feeling aggressive. Could you imagine how useful that would be if people turned blue when they were feeling aggressive? Then we would know to walk in the other direction. Then you have the gobby fish, which changes gender from male to female and from female to male. And the clownfish also changes genders as well. And for some fish, it takes only a few hours, and for some up to 2 weeks. But here's my favorite piece of information acquired on that trip. There are 7 quintillion, 500 quadrillion grains of sand in the world. In case you want to make sure you know that, I'll just repeat that. 7 quintillion, 500 quadrillion. And this is according to the math geniuses at the University of Hawaii. That's more sand granules than we can ever imagine. And where does it all come from? In Hawaii, where beaches are constantly ranked the best in the world, a significant portion of that pristine, white, beautiful sand is actually poop. Yes, poop. You heard me correctly. Here's why. Because parrotfishes, or uhu in Hawaiian, are key players in regulating reef life. Their parrot-like beaks and fused together teeth are used for scraping and biting off dead coral, while additional teeth in their throats help to break it all down into sand. And snorkelers can actually hear them chomping or see the bite marks they leave on the coral reef. Now, because parrotfish or uhus don't have stomachs, their meal passes straight through the long intestines, exploding in a cloud of sand out the back door. Larger parrotfish are like sand factories. They produce as much as 840 pounds of sand per year. I can't even imagine what I don't know about nature and astounding creation of Hashem. So that's just a smidgen of info from what I knew I did not know. What we know we don't know is much larger than what we know, but the largest category is what we don't know we don't know. I have no way of knowing what I don't know beyond all the things I know I don't know. This last category is clearly the largest of all. And I preface and frame our talk tonight with this because we need to be reminded that as much as we study on any aspect of the universe, there is so much we will never know. How much more so is this true regarding any aspect of the Torah? We know nothing, and we don't even know the extent of what we don't know. And if that's true, like I said, for science or any other category of knowledge, then what can we say about the Torah, which is infinite, which is the knowledge of God? It is one with God. And yet we are bidden to study and to study more, so we keep studying. And it has been said that study is like the windshield wipers that wipe away the grime that blocks us from seeing straight through the window of our soul. In other words, windshield wipers don't actually create something new. They just wipe away the garbage so you can see through that window. In our case, it's not the knowledge that moves us to action, but it does provide a bridge from which we can jump off into action. So let's begin right now in this very slim window of opportunity while Harry and Meg are just momentarily distracting the world with regurgitating their story just before Netflix drops the next season of My Unorthodox Life, which I would describe as narcissism on steroids. Let's use this opportunity to ask why. Why should or why does a married Jewish woman cover her hair? Why indeed does the Torah mandate that? And the answer is, on the most simple and most profound level, that kisui rosh, which is Hebrew for covering the head for a married woman, is simply a chok. And that is a word that means a statute that defies intellectual inquiry and rational explanation. It is the will of God. It remains transrational to us mortals, period, exclamation point. And it's precisely this component that makes the chukim, the mitzvot, which are trans or super rational, the quintessential expression of a mitzvah, because we observe it for no other reason than because God so desires. There's no hint of ulterior motive or satisfaction found in these mitzvot. There's only the pure, pristine, unadulterated desire to bond with the Almighty, bereft of and unconstrained by our intelligent embrace of the idea. Other mitzvot that fall in the same category are, for instance, the kosher diet. It's not about trichinosis. Or shatnez, which is the prohibition of wearing a garment that is comprised of both wool and linen. We have no idea why that combination offends Hashem, but he doesn't want us to wear clothing like that. We have to learn to respect what we cannot know. It takes humility. Now, for some reason, and I'm sad to admit this, it seems especially true that there's an inability to accept our inability to completely fathom a mitzvah when it's distinctly a woman's mitzvah. You know how we chafe against mansplaining? Well, femsplaining is also a problem. For instance, mikvah. We treat mikvah like this boutique item. Like we tell people, you have to go to the mikvah because it's amazing. It's amazing for your marriage, which it is, all things being equal. But it's also true that marriage is very complicated, and there are a lot of people who use the mikvah and their marriages leave a lot to be desired. Or your sex life will be off the charts. Or you have to go because it's a spa. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, what if you don't have enough money, disposable income, or disposable time to go to a spa? Or you don't like spas, it's not your thing. But perhaps most pernicious is this. You have to go to the mikvah because it's amazing. You will be reborn. You will be regenerated, rejuvenated. You will hear celestial choirs. You will meet your great-grandmother. You'll feel so spiritual. And the problem with this is that for every one woman that comes out levitating, like 19 come out cold and wet. And this is a terrible problem when we can't own the mitzvah and say, this is a great mitzvah. This is what Hashem wants us to do. That's why we do it. And I find that hair covering gets the same treatment. It's the same femsplaining syndrome. So we have things like, we have to cover our hair because it's so holy, fabricated. We have to cover our hair to keep it special for our husbands, false. We have to cover our hair so everyone knows we are married, dubious. We have to cover our hair so we remember that we are married, a wedding ring of sorts. Really? Where does it say that? And then, of course, we have to cover our hair so we look less attractive. Complete baloney crossed with malarkey. So why, for heaven's sake, do we cover our hair? Because God said so. Now, the closest we come to an understanding in primary texts is noting that there is a definite connection between hair covering and loss of virginity. The hair of a virgin, a betula, an unmarried woman, irrespective of her age, is not considered erva. Erva is the halachic term for nakedness, or an aspect of the body considered to be erotic. But with consummation of her marriage, or according to some opinions, when the marriage ceremony is completed, a woman is different. Especially after consummation, she is initiated into the sexual experience. She taps into the power and the prowess inherent in intimacy. And that is why there is an additional need for that last aspect of tzniut, modesty. All the other aspects kick in when she's much younger, and this becomes relevant and important at this point. Hair is an extremely sensual part of a woman, and nothing is quite as alluring. Now, of course, it's true that a woman and her husband undoubtedly share an exclusive bond. Enjoying each other's bodies is inherent to intimacy. But in general, that's not the reason for covering the aspects of our body referred to in halachic terms as erva. Simply put, the exposure of erva, in this case, the hair of a married woman, contravenes the axiom of tzniut, modesty. In his essential distillation of all of the Torah, the prophet Micha taught, God has told you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, to love goodness, and to walk modestly with your God. Tzniut is not an outfit, it's a worldview. It begins with a constant consciousness of Hashem's presence that fills all time and space. And this is why tznius, modesty, is necessary even when we are alone and even in the dark. And it is certainly about carrying ourselves with dignity, befitting the daughters of the King of all kings when we are with others. We do not cover our hair to keep it special for our husband, just as we do not cover other private aspects of our body for that reason, although surely these parts of our body are to be shared exclusively with our husbands. A married woman covers her hair to walk with her Creator. And once we understand that, it allows us to reply to what might just be the most oft asked question, which is, if your wig looks just as good as your hair or even better, especially with the newest wigs that look like they're growing out of your scalp, what's the point of the wig? But again, the answer is the Torah mandates that a married woman must cover her hair. She could cover it with a lampshade, a potato sack, anything. A wig allows a woman to do exactly that. Questioning the efficacy of a natural-looking sheitel is common, but it's based on the mistaken premise that a sheitel or wig is meant to detract from a woman's body. There's no such thing. It's not found in any sources. Now, this idea is erroneously predicated. It's likely connected to the erroneous notion mentioned above that a woman's hair is covered for the purpose of reserving it for her husband. If you're covering it to reserve it for your husband, then it makes sense that if you're anywhere else, you would have to look less beautiful. But it doesn't say that anywhere. Jewish law does mandate that a married woman's hair be covered carefully, properly. As to exactly how it should be covered, various communities have different customs. In the final analysis, as long as a woman's hair is completely covered, exactly how she achieves that goal is a matter of her choice. And if she lives within a certain community, it shouldn't contravene the custom of her family or her community. Beyond questions about the beauty of a wig, there seems to be concern with just how closely a wig might resemble a woman's natural hair. In this vein, some people argue that wigs might be just as erotically stimulating as one's natural hair. But the interesting thing is that centuries ago, this very issue was addressed by halachic codifiers. For instance, the Shiltei Giborim wrote that the principle that a woman's hair is erva, that it constitutes an aspect of her body that must be covered, applies only to hair that is connected to her scalp, but not to a wig. And a wig, of course, does not constitute leaving your hair uncovered. And it doesn't seem to make a difference whether the wig is made of her own hair or of that of another woman, as long as it is a hair covering and is unconnected to her scalp. Although there is a community that has the custom not to use their own hair. Practically speaking, most women don't have the kind of hair that would be, really efficacious for making a wig from. Rabbi Ovadia Odaya wrote that man is tempted only by things attached directly to the body of a woman herself, for those things have life. Once something is separated from her, it ceases to be forbidden. Okay, Now, another question. What about marit ayin? Marit ayin means how the eye perceives it. Like, for instance, there are things that it's not a problem halachically to do, but the problem is somebody might see you doing what you're doing and think you're doing something else. Like, for instance, you're just drinking cold water in a non-kosher restaurant, but somebody walking past the restaurant and seeing you might think you're eating there, and that would be problematic. So why is it not problematic for a woman to cover her hair with a wig when somebody might think that she's not covering her hair? And Reb Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, addressed this, and he gave a number of reasons. And he said that in the final analysis, everybody knows that there are wigs available. And so there's no reason to think that this woman would not be wearing a wig. Not to mention, he says that even when men can't tell it's a wig, women usually can. And this reminds me of how when I was a young child, I remember going to weddings or bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs or whatever the occasion was, and the caterer would always put a sign on the table saying that the creamer and the desserts were made from non-dairy ingredients. But today, you go to all of these events, nobody puts a sign because the usage of these, these creamers made of other ingredients, or oat milk or rice milk or almond milk or whatever milk, it's so ubiquitous, we don't worry about somebody thinking that we're actually drinking coffee with milk after a meat meal or eating dairy-based ice cream. So we don't worry about the fact that the wig might look to somebody like we're not wearing a wig. Everybody knows there are wigs, there are beautiful wigs, there are very natural looking wigs, and so that's not a problem. So in summation, we don't really know why it is so important to God that a married Jewish woman cover her hair, but we do have abundant information about the impact of this action on a woman and her family. The Talmud relates that Kimchit, who was a woman who lived in the Second Temple era, merited to have 7 sons who were high priests. And the Talmud asks, why did she have this great merit? And they asked her, why do you think you merited this? And she replied, the rafters of my house have never seen the plaits of my hair. Now, interestingly, the rabbi said to her, interesting, but there are so many other women who did the same thing, and they were not rewarded exactly this way, which teaches us that many, many women were fastidious with the hair covering, even in the privacy, all the way going back to the Second Temple era. But what she was saying was that her profound devotion to this aspect of modesty, to the extent that even when she was alone in her house, the rafters of the house never saw her braids, affected her sons to such an extent that they became high priests. Now, what's so interesting about this is that priesthood, generally speaking, always is passed down through the patrilineal line. If your father is a priest, your father's father is a priest, your father's father's father was a priest, then you're a Kohen, you're a priest. However, the designation of high priest, that's transcendent. That, the Talmud is teaching us, came through the mother's modesty. At a Farbrengen many years ago, the Rebbe addressed a question that some women might have. They might say, you know what? I don't need to have children who are high priests. I'm good. I just want them to be mentioned. But the Rebbe said, which mother would pass up on the opportunity to give her children an additional advantage? And if she has this power, then she must use this power. In addition, we're taught, the Zohar teaches famously, that if a woman takes pains to scrupulously cover her hair at all times, Blessings from above and blessings from below will be heaped upon her, her husband, and her children. And here I want to just say that we need to understand this advisedly. In the same way, for instance, you understand what our incredible hostess says when she says, in the way that we give, God will give to us. We need to understand that it's not quid pro quo. It's not a linear line. It's not so simple that if a Jew always eats kosher, they're never going to get colon cancer. But if they flip a light on Shabbos, then they could get electrocuted. That's not the way the world works. There are many, many, many times where we do things, we comport ourselves the right way, we do it with all our heart, and we don't, in a manifest way, see the promised blessings. And the reason the world works this way is in order for us to retain our freedom of choice, our volition. Because if it was so simple that we would see the result so clearly, we would not be serving God. We would be Ottomans. We would be serving ourselves. Or we would be like puppets with the strings being, pulled from above. God wants to give us free choice. And so we're never going to see clearly. We beg and ask God that we be able to see blessings that are open and manifest. But we don't really see God's computations in a clear way. We cannot do God's bookkeeping. One thing that is good to remember is that even when we think we're not being rewarded, we have no idea what God is sparing us from at any given moment. We might think, oh my gosh, we have this problem, this problem, this problem, and things are not good. But we can never know what we don't know. We can never know the blessings that God is giving us by shielding us from things, God forbid. Now, there's another whole level to this, and that is the mystical level of why a woman should keep her hair covered. And I'm happy to go into that. But before I do, I'd like to open up to your questions right now. And I want to remind us that, again, we should not treat hair covering differently from any other mitzvah. For instance, we have this biblical commandment to take 4 types of vegetation on Sukkot. Now, let's be honest. Please don't tell me that it makes sense to take a citron, an etrog, a closed frond from a date palm tree, a lulav, a myrtle, hadassim, and a willow, aravot, and bring it together and shake it. Don't even try to tell me that. It's true that the Kabbalah, mysticism, and Chassidus can explain the energies, but these explanations only point to so much more than we can never know. So maybe, just maybe, we have to make peace with the fact that we Jews are different and unusual and eternal and transcendent. We are commanded to live in this world. But we are most certainly not of this world. We have an aspect of the divine that we carry around within us at all times. And if we pay attention, we can hear it reminding us of the privilege of being connected to that which we cannot understand, the spectacular wonder of tapping into that which we cannot know. So let's just lean into our mitzvah, embrace it in all of its transcendence and in all of its counterintuitiveness, and do so proudly, and pray to God that we will see in an open and manifest way all the blessings that are promised to us. So right now, I am very happy to take any and all questions. The easiest way is probably for you to put it in the chat box.
So we have a few questions in the chat box. So if you want to just look at it over really fast, I just want to say thank you, and we're going to continue this program. But I just want to show everyone this book that I got that I'm very excited about. It's Holy Intimacy, the Heart and Soul of a Jewish Marriage. It is, the authors are Sarah Morozov and our guest speaker tonight, Rivkah Slonim. I encourage everyone to buy it. On Amazon, it's under $25. In the stores, it's under 25 as well. It's a great book. It goes through so many topics. I'm in the middle of it. So excited. We could even do a book club on this if anyone wants. But I'm going to put the link again in the chat box for those that want to. I also just want to say that tonight is a Hakel gathering in the times of, it's Hakel year in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, men, women, and children gathered. Tonight we're gathering, weekly we gather, and I'm asking everyone, whatever you learn, to please share. I'm going to also put in the chat box our YouTube channel that we post the recording the days after. And please subscribe and please share it with all your friends. Thank you for being here.
Okay, I'm going to go to the questions in the chat. If I am correct, this is the first question. What about long wigs? Some Lubavitch rabbis were against them. So I think it's important not to conflate the mitzvah of hair covering. And we know that the Lubavitch Rebbe personally gave some women money in the form of checks to buy themselves the most beautiful wigs possible. In fact, sending one particular woman to buy her wigs from the wig makers that were servicing the women in Hollywood. So we definitely want the wig to be beautiful, and we want the woman to feel really, really good in her wig. But it seems that some rabbis may have been concerned that a very, very long wig somehow was not in keeping with modesty, but it's not about the wig per se. So very, very long hair on a young woman whose hair is not covered might have the same issue. I guess it depends on what it looks like and how she wears it and so on and so forth. The next question I see here is there any specific punishment for not covering the hair? So it's very notable that the Rebbe never tired of quoting the teachings from the Zohar, the Zoharic teachings about all the blessings that would come to a woman and her family if she covered her hair very carefully. He never once quoted the Zoharic words about the punishment. And so I am certainly not going to do so. But I will say that yes, you know, we do have sources that speak to the deleterious effect spiritually, and therefore often it could be, God forbid, reflected in the material realm when this is not done. How can a woman deal with hair covering emotionally, since hair is a very special part of one's personality? Hair is a very special part of a woman's personality. At least it is for many women. My hair was never anything to write home about personally, but I get it. I mean, some women have gorgeous hair, and it could be very difficult to cover. I think the answer to that question is really the answer to so many questions in life. In life, everything we do almost is distilled to a cost-benefit analysis. You know, we have to make choices and we have to ask ourselves, what is more important to me? So if a woman sees her covering her hair as a punishment or as an annoyance or as something that doesn't have a very good reason, and there's such a steep price to pay, it can be very difficult. But if she understands it as a conduit of tremendous blessing into her life, and again buys a really beautiful wig that she can feel really comfortable in, and not just comfortable but proud and happy, then I think that she can overcome the emotional difficulty. But I don't want to poo-poo it. I think this is a difficult mitzvah. It can be a difficult mitzvah for many women to keep, and that just makes it all the greater when they do it, I think. Based on what you're saying, why do rabbis come out against various types of wigs for being too pretty or too natural? What's the source of this? So first of all, it's important to understand, and I kind of alluded to this in my initial words. It's important to understand that different communities have different customs. And in some communities, in their particular custom and maybe worldview, it's very important that the woman broadcast that her hair is covered, and even covered twice, which is why in some communities the women wear hats on top of their wigs or something else. But halachically, a woman has to cover her hair, period. And from the Rebbe's perspective, he very much championed women wearing wigs above any other type of covering. He felt that this way, all of the hair would be covered. It's true that you could cover your hair with a kerchief or a hat and every single hair will be covered, but it's also true that it's more difficult to do it that way. And usually a hat or a kerchief or something else will look better when there's a little bit of hair sticking out, and so on and so forth. And I think we can definitely know that the Rebbe would have been askance to see women pulling hair out and putting it on top of their wig, because over and over and over, he said that the wig is the best way to cover the hair, precisely because it covers all of the hair. And the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe's predecessor, spoke about how important it is for every single hair to be covered. So from the Rebbe's perspective, it all had to be covered. And the Rebbe felt that it was important for a woman to look good and to feel good. And he had no problem with wigs that looked very natural and very beautiful. But in some communities, they have a slightly different posture. And you have rabbis speaking out from a different vantage point. Do Jewish women that married a non-Jewish man cover their hair? That's an excellent question, and the answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is because while generally speaking, when we use the term marriage, certainly in the Western world, but even conventionally, in really anywhere in the world, marriage is understood to be a fluid construct, and it's a man-made construct. So throughout history, there have been marriages between people of the same gender. There's been marriages between siblings. There's been marriages between two sisters and one man, two men and one sister, between living people and dead people. And if you think I'm making this up, you could read Elizabeth Gilbert's very excellent survey on marriage throughout the ages, in which she, a non-Jewish woman, concludes that when you speak about marriage always having been a union between one man and one woman, that is only true if you're talking about Judaism. Because again, in the wider world, marriage is a malleable construct. It could be anything you decide for it to be. In Iran, for instance, there was something called a sigeh, which was a marriage for a temporary amount of time, and you had to get this. It was almost like a pass if you wanted to be in the street with a person of the opposite gender. Okay, but in Judaism, marriage flows from God's commandment, and marriage can only be in accordance with the parameters God has set. That means it's a man and a woman, and a Jewish man and a Jewish woman. And anything other is simply not marriage. So it can be a domestic union, it can be a wonderful alliance, but it's not a marriage. And therefore, a Jewish woman who's married to a non-Jewish man does not cover her hair, because halachically, she's not married. Okay, good question. She said, meaning I said, hair is considered erva for any woman who's not a virgin. Are unmarried women who are not virgins supposed to cover their hair? So this is a good question. Practically speaking, in yesteryear, people used to get married a lot younger. And based on our sources, it seems like extramarital sex was rare. But it existed, certainly, as long as people have existed. But we've never found that this was actually enacted regarding a woman who might have lost her virginity but was not married. So halachically, the answer would be that an unmarried woman who is not a virgin does not have to cover her hair. But it's interesting because there are some sources that talk about a woman having to cover her hair, both married and unmarried, and the commentaries come to the conclusion that this is talking about a married woman or a woman who is not currently married but was married earlier, but not the unmarried woman, the single woman. But I will say that in a nod to that, you could go into communities and see where single women, even little girls, have their hair braided. And it's possible that that is somehow connected to this idea of all women covering their hair. If it's such a basic mitzvah, why did religious women in many communities not cover their hair fully until more recently? Rebecca, that's a phenomenal question. And there are other examples of this exact paradigm. And I would say it has to do with lack of education. I know a lot of young women, and I'm not talking about Hasidic, I'm not talking about ultra-Orthodox, I'm talking about Orthodox women, very mainstream, whose mothers do not cover their hair, whose grandmothers do not cover their hair, but they cover their hair because once you learn the sources, you see it's actually biblically mandated. I think a lot of people think it's kind of like either a custom or like something peripheral or tangential to Jewish law. And when you start studying the sources, you see that it's actually a biblical mandate. And what's ironic is that you see a lot of men married to women who don't cover their hair, but they wear a kippah, they wear a yarmulke. And until the Middle Ages, it was custom, and it was only the readers of the Torah and the leaders of prayer, those men covered their hair. And later it was established as custom for all Jewish men, and it was included in the Code of Jewish Law that a man not walk more than 4 paces without his head covered. But nobody could argue that it's as important as a married woman covering her hair. But people simply don't know. So I think that that's the reason, lack of education, a lack of clarity on just how basic and important this is. Can you explain what completely covering your hair means? How do you take a shower? Is your husband allowed to see your hair in privacy? Okay, all good questions. First, yes, your husband is permitted to see your hair in privacy. How do you take a shower? In the conventional manner. You don't have to wear a shower cap in the shower. Now, it's true that, that Kimchit says that the walls of her or the rafters of her home never saw the plaits of her hair. And although I did not see the source, although I've asked for it a few times, but I once heard somebody say that Kimchit had women who would hold some kind of covering atop her hair when she was bathing. I'm not sure, but I will just say that I think that most women who are very careful and very fastidious with covering their hair, uncover their hair in the shower, that's permitted. And yes, your husband is permitted to see your hair. We're talking about completely covering your hair, certainly when you leave the house. And in accordance with the mystical sources and the ruling of the Tzemach Tzedek, it should be in your house as well. Do divorced women need to continue covering their hair? This is a matter of different opinion in different communities and different rabbis. And I would suggest that you speak to whoever is your rabbi and get a ruling from them. There was a picture online with Rivkah and Chaya Mushka that looked like she wasn't wearing a sheitel. How can one explain it to people? She was wearing a sheitel. You could have a picture that looks like she wasn't wearing a sheitel, but that doesn't compute to her not wearing a sheitel. Why do certain communities forbid human hair wigs and permit only synthetic? Is it because much human hair is used for idol worship? If it's used for idol worship, how can it be made into a wig? How do they worship with hair? I don't know how they worship with hair. I don't know much about this idol worship thing. I know there are communities that burn human hair wigs. You would have to ask them exactly what's up with that. But, you know, there's nothing in Jewish law that contravenes using human hair wig. Although I will say that there are communities where women won't wear human hair wig, not because of any association with idol worship, and here that could have been worn by women that were serving idols or something like that, but rather because it looks so natural. And in those communities, they prefer to not wear a wig that looks that natural. Is the obligation to be careful with every hair at all times also apply to a divorced woman, i.e. covered outside and inside, but in the house, some hair sticking out? Again, I would like people to ask their rabbi concerning a divorced woman. But I would say, with my very limited knowledge, I would think that a woman who's divorced does not have to cover her hair as carefully, as fastidiously in the house. Public dressing room, swimming pool. So here, look, a woman who understands that covering her hair constantly and completely and carefully brings transcendent blessings into her life will do that in a public dressing room as well. And she will wear a bathing cap when she's swimming, even if she's only with all women. Does she have to do so halachically? No, we're not saying that halachically that's necessary. But if she is attentive to the mystical writings, and that's what she will do. The same thing when she goes for a massage and so on and so forth. What is the biblical source? The biblical source is found in the biblical portion of Naso, in the 4th book, Bamidbar. And there it speaks about a woman who is brought to the temple because her husband suspected her of infidelity. And then on top of that, she was witnessed. There were 2 witnesses who warned her not to do this. And nevertheless, she then went and sequestered herself with a man other than her husband. And this was witnessed by these 2 witnesses. So she would be brought to the temple. And when she was brought to the temple, in an effort to get her to admit that she had indeed engaged in this kind of behavior, many things were done. And among the things that were done was that her hair was uncovered. And the Torah tells us that her hair was uncovered. And from this, we learn that married women always had their hair covered, and that a married woman must have her hair covered, and that to uncover her hair is an indignity and is enough to tear away at her resistance and break down her resistance, and for her to come clean and say that, in fact, she engaged in that which she is suspected of having done. A widow falls in the same category as a divorced woman. We have a question here that there was a woman who was the wife of a biblical character known as On, the son of Pelet. And she sat in front of her tent and she uncovered her hair because she knew that by doing so, she would scare away, or the men who wanted to come to her husband and get him entangled in something nefarious and negative would just disband. And that's a very important thing for us to remember. So thank you. I don't know what your first name is. The last name is Wilhelm. Thank you for including that in our conversation. So here's a demographic. Here's a cohort of people who actually were ready to revolt against Moses, against Moshe Rabbeinu. So we can infer that they were not the most pious people, yet even they would not be found in the vicinity of a married woman whose hair was uncovered. Is covering your hair all or nothing, or an all or nothing mitzvah? Does she get blessings for covering part of her hair? So thank you very much. I think this looks like it's from a woman named Rachel, but I don't know. I just see ROCH, but thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to go with that, for bringing up that mitzvah, for bringing up that question. So in general, it's very important for us to never fall into that false paradigm of all or nothing. Something is always better than nothing. So you see women coming to the synagogue, for instance, and out of respect, because they are in a holy place, putting a doily on or a yarmulke, a kippah, covering some part of their hair. First of all, they deserve a lot of points for showing respect. Second, biblically speaking, they are covering the crown of their heads, and they are doing that part of the mitzvah. Rabbinically, there's still a lot of hair that is left out of the covering, and therefore that is certainly not the best way, but I would definitely infer that they would get blessings for what they're doing. How long can one's hair be? According to the Rebbe, somebody told me he meant it could be at least 2 fingers. Somebody is asking regarding the fact that the Rebbe was a proponent of a woman keeping her hair short under her hair covering. And at least according to the record of one private conversation, the Rebbe did, it seems, show his 2 fingers and say it should be no longer than 2 fingers in the width. Perhaps that was so a woman shouldn't be kind of drawn to or tempted to have her hair exposed, because when it's that short, it's not that tempting. So somebody wants me to share the Kabbalistic ideas regarding covering the hair, which I'm happy to do, but I don't know what Chaya's timeline is and how long this class is supposed to go or not go. So I'm going to turn to Chaya and ask her.
So just tell me how long it's going to be. So we might share the video first and then share it after. Let me know.
I'm going to say maybe between 7 and 9 minutes.
Perfect. So let's do it.
Do it. Okay, then here we go. All right. So I think the first thing we have to understand when we're talking about anything Kabbalistic, okay, not just here, but it's helpful to understand how Kabbalah works, more generally speaking. And I think like an apt metaphor might be a microscope. A microscope is an instrument that provides an enlarged image of a small object. And by doing so, it reveals all the details that are too small to be seen by the naked eye. So as with every aspect of Kabbalistic teaching, if we're approaching here through the Kabbalistic lens, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to understand the ability of here to attract or conversely repel spiritual energies. And interestingly enough, here occupies a prominent place in Kabbalistic teachings. Not going to go into all of it now. We're just going to say that the mystical implications of a married woman keeping her hair covered very carefully go beyond ordinary considerations of modesty. The Zohar, which is kind of the Bible of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar connects the covering of hair to the broader Kabbalistic idea, according to which hair is connected to judgment and severity, and therefore uniquely vulnerable and susceptible to evil energies. Now, to go a little bit more into this, let me explain it this way. The forces of evil, and the Kabbalistic term is klipa, which means a husk. So these forces are always seeking access to the Jewish body. This is because it is only from holiness that the unholy energies can draw their vivifying force. It's like weeds in a garden. Nobody's going to go out and water weeds. So the weeds only get watered. They get their sukkah from the water that's lovingly, poured over the rose bush. So that's why the evil kind of energies try to angle their way into the Jewish body. But the inherent holiness of a Jew repels these unholy seekers. and they're kept at bay. But the Achilles heel is the here, because the here is different from all other aspects of the anatomy, in that the here, despite its very close proximity to the brain, is not connected to the brain. It has no nerve endings, it has no blood vessels. As such, here provides the only port of entry for the klipot, for the evil energies who seek desperately to siphon energy from the holy. So the here is not quite alive nor completely dead, which is why when you cut it, you're not pained. So the here is possessed of this minutest amount of living energy. In Kabbalistic terms, we would describe this as tzimtzum, contraction. And because of this, here provides the klipot with the energy that they seek in a proportion that they can comfortably ingest, because the light of God is so contracted. That's why it is convenient for the klipot. But when you contract godly energy, you also get a deleterious energy. And therefore, tzimtzum needs to be handled with great care. And that's why there's a lot in Kabbalah about a man keeping his hair short, because we don't want evil energies to feed off of that. Okay. But now we have to ask, why is there so much in Kabbalah about a man keeping his hair short? Nothing in Kabbalistic writings about a woman keeping her hair short. And then, what is it about a woman that's married that changes the whole dynamic? So to answer this question, we need to reference another Kabbalistic and Hasidic idea, which is that we're taught that the entire world was created and is sustained in binary fashion with the modalities of mashpia, which means the initiator and the provider, and on the other hand, the makabel, the receiver. This might just be the most prominent binary of all. Generally speaking, the masculine is associated with the modality of mashpia, bestowal or filling, while the feminine modality is associated with receiving, receptivity, the vessels that welcome the bounty. And once we understand that, we're in a position to understand why, when the klipot, when the evil energies seek to like parasites to feed themselves, they're going to approach the male because they're drawn to the source of bestowal. I mean, you're not going to approach somebody who has no food in their house, but you might approach somebody who has a lot of food and might have extra to get some. But all of this changes when a woman gets married, because when two people get married, the Zohar explains, they become two halves of one body, not just two halves of one soul, but plag gufa, two halves of one body. Now, this body is comprised of both a male and female aspect. And now the klipot much prefer to feed off of the female aspect, the woman's here. Why? Because Kabbalistically, the feminine is associated with the sphera, with the emanation of Malchut, the final one of the 10 emanations of God. It's the one associated with the most intense contraction of God's energy. And here we already said is always associated with tzimtzum, with contraction. So a woman's here is like tzimtzum to the second degree, contraction within contraction, which means that the holy energies will flock to her here because they get the vivifying force that they're seeking delivered in tiny increments. Like imagine a baby needs a tiny nipple, then a toddler can use a tiny hole in the nipple. Otherwise they'll choke. Then you need a sippy cup. But it's very hard for most young children to drink from a glass. It's too much. So for these evil energies, they want to get this holy energy, but they want to get it in an increment that's easily digestible. And so therefore, when a woman gets married and she is joined with the male aspect of mashpia, of bestowal, they come to feed off of her here. Now we note, however, that while Kabbalistically a man is bidden to keep his hair short, a woman, even after marriage, halachically does not have to do the same. It's enough that she cover it. Now, as we said, the Rebbe did recommend that a woman's hair be kept short. Most likely, we can never know, for practical reasons, so that it can be covered properly. However, there were always many, many levels to everything. So therefore, when a woman covers her hair punctiliously, it's enough that she just cover it. She blocks the entrance. She impedes the arrival of these klipot. In fact, by very carefully covering every strand of hair, she not only blockades the klipot, but she weakens them. And when she weakens them, her hair, covered hair, becomes a conduit for the most magnificent blessings, which are delineated in the Zohar. I hope I came in less than 9 minutes there.
Thank you so much, Rivkah Slonim, for sharing tonight. It was very insightful and very informative and very inspiring. And I hope we'll all keep this mitzvah in an even more special way. Tonight we had so many ladies on the class, 117, which equals tov, which means equals good. In the meantime, while we pull up the video, if you can put in the chat box your name and where you're from, so our guest speakers can see her audience. And really, thank you for your time.
Chaya, thank you for the opportunity, and more power to you, girl.
You rock.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We're going to share a video now. So I hope you're inspired like I was. Give us one moment while we pull it up.
The Rebbetzin, Chana Schneerson, the Rebbe's mother, left Russia together with the Ashalonim, groups that left Russia illegally. I, as a child, as an infant, was also on one of them, and made her way eventually to the old Air Force base in Poking, Germany. My family happened to live right next door to the Rebbe's. Tafshin Zayin, she left to France, where the Rebbe came and met her. And it took 2 months before the Rebbe was able to get her all the papers necessary to bring her to America. The Rebbetzin was very cultured, carried herself well, almost regally. We could see that just the way she walked in the street. She had many, many tzaras in her life after all. Very, very, very difficult life. And yet, always with a smile. People would come over and greet her, always with a nice shake of the head and a nice smile. So, Tafshin Yutes. I'm walking down Kingston Avenue, and I meet the Rebbe's mother. I had the breitkeit to say, since I was in the house a few times, I said, Nachne given mein bar mitzvah. So she showered me with the brachas, and then she says to me, Du gedenkst dich ob der noch gelaufen in Poking unter die Hitele? Do you remember I chased you around in Poking to put a hat on your head? Now, in Poking I was a year old, so I didn't remember anything from Poking. And she says to me that she heard from her husband, ich hab gehört von meinem Mann, als a Kind darf man nicht rauslassen mit a bläsen Kopf. Darf man unter einer Hitele. You always put a hat on a child. Reißt es herab, tut man das auch noch einmal. Reißt es herab, ist noch einmal angetan. Aber rauslassen, das tun wir nicht. So she said to me, deine Mama hat rausgelassen mit der Hitele und dir nicht gefallen die Hitele. I didn't like it. So I would tear it off. So she would run around putting it back on for me. Weil mein Mann hat gesagt, das ist eine Gehe zu Yerushalayim. Simchas Teire Tov Shin Yud Tes was the first time that my father let me stay up for the Nigen, which the Rebbe used to teach after the Akofes and after Sudas Yontif and Simchas Teire. 4 o'clock in the morning, he began to tell a story. He told the story of Shamil, which everybody knows. And then that was the story, and he says the nimshul of the story is the neshama comes down, Yeredes Laguf, and the neshama struggles with its mission to be able to change the guf and nefesh habamis, and the neshama yearns to go up l'mayla, but the neshama has to stay l'mata because that's the kavanah elyono, and that was the nimshul. While the Rebbe was telling the nimshul, he cried terribly. He cried so that his body shook, ad kedei kach. And then he began to teach the Nigen, Shamil Zeh. So I left, slept, I got up with a start, and as I'm coming up Kingston Avenue, I meet the Rebbetzin. And she says to me, "Du bist nicht gewesen bei Nigen?" So I very proudly said, "Yes, I was there." And she asked me, "Welchem Nigen is gewesen?" What the Nigen was. So I said, "Ich gedenk nicht. Aber sie gewesen am meisten mit Shamil. Shmil, something like that." So she looks at me and smiles. And then I said, "Ihr gedenkt nicht den Nigen, aber der Rebbe ist sehr, sehr stark gewähnt." And we're walking towards 770 that way. Get to 770, instead of going to where the Weibashul was, she started going down the incline that went to the Sukkah. A little bit unusual. We walked down, there were 2 swinging doors. And we got to the swinging doors, and I said, "You will da reingehen?" So she nods to me, and I open the doors, and she steps inside, and she's standing and watching. The Rebbe was on the bima. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I figured, let me make a shvil between her. She was not a tall woman, between her and the Rebbe. So I tapped a couple of guys on the shoulders, those who were standing in front of me, and suddenly a shvil opens up from where she's standing next to the door, all the way until the front, till where the Rebbe was standing. The Rebbe says good yontif to her. She gets it yontif, smiles, and leaves. And people ask me right away, "What happened? Where'd you see her? What? I don't know." Finally, somebody squeezed out of me that I told her I was walking with her. I told her I was by the Nigen. I told her the Rebbe was crying. So, "Oh, yeah. You told the Rebbe's mother that the Rebbe was crying. The Rebbe she wanted to see him." The way the Rebbe performed Kibbud Eim was just unbelievable. From the day she arrived in America, he saw her every single day. In spite of the tremendous amount of work and responsibilities that he had, he made sure that every single day he would visit his mother. We saw it.
My son, long may he live, has just left my home. He visits me daily, and twice on Friday. He makes my life much better. My apartment, where I am now, is not very large. It so happens that during the time he sits here with me, the room seems to be much bigger. During his visits, I don't at all feel many of the things that I find unpleasant, and under the inspiration of his noble devotion and greatness, I manage to live with them until his next visit, 24 hours later.
As her Zira Risose in the bottom of Droshes, it are noch geworden, Asher Yeladete, Druv, ist da noch gewachsen als Rebbe Shua ben Chananya, und mir sagt, das ist seine war schwach. Und käme du über Kamer Pomim, Also die Jechanan, wenn Sache heute meine Schwachen, sagt die Mischen. Als sie hat dem gesagt, dass lebt ewig, bei Sud, bei einer Missgabe verchul. Sie kommen zu der Beschube, Chananya, ich darf sagen, Amayle Ine. Punkt, wie mir sagt, bei Sud, Amayle Ine. Sagt mir nach, was sie nehmen, die Meile, sein Meile ist, als Aschere Jeladete. Für das nicht erinnern, bis wann das wird seine Meile.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing this video with us. It was my personal favorites. I want to give a shout out to Jem. Thank you for making this video possible and all your videos possible. It's worth it to subscribe and to become a member of Jem to see their videos in full. Otherwise, you can check it out on their website. I want to say, when you see someone great, you should always look into their mother, especially when you're looking into matchmaking in shidduchim. Always see who the mother is. And the Rebbitzin was just the most amazing woman, and she was so proud of her son. Her son was the Rebbe. However, there was always time for his mother, and his mom waited every single day for him to come visit her. There's so many stories. We did a class on Vav Tishrei with Mrs. Miriam Swerdlove. The recording is going to go out before Shabbat, so look out for it. It's funny, it's humorous. Mrs. Miriam Swerdlove had a family connection and a friend connection with the Rebbitzin, and look out for it. It's been such an honor having our guest speaker again, Rivkah Slonim. Such an honor having Sarah Karmely share with us. Such an honor having all of you ladies here tonight. Next week, we are going to be having our class on Tuesday night instead of Wednesday. It's going to be in honor of my birthday, the day that someone's born. That's the day that God says that the world can't exist without you. So I'm grateful and thankful for being born, and thankful to all of you. It is also the anniversary of our second year of our class. This class has been going 2 years strong. Fran has been on this class every single week of this class. So thanks for being here. Thanks for all of our new viewers. Thank you for everyone who joined this class, and we will see you next week. Have a blessed and wonderful night. And again, Vav Tishrei on Shabbat, please do something extra special for the Rebbitzins' birthday, because she gave us our Rebbe. Good night, everyone. And also, I just want to quickly say a big thank you to Shandy Jacobson and Joelle, and to all the people that help out with the class. Good night.
Thank you,
Good
Chaya.
night. Bye-bye.